The work that Andrew carries out in the Toowoomba factory of Queensland Museums, Cobb Co, will mean the coach will be better placed in the future to become a more accessible historic artefact, the sort of thing that perhaps one day people can touch, climb up on and inside of, and get a better impression of what life was like as a traveller back in the days when Cobb Co coaches ruled the roads and tracks of the nation.
Well, hopefully I'll get in to pull apart some of that timber. I'm going to do a really detailed condition report, just start from the front and work back and just work out where the breakages are, where the rot is, where the, there's some leather parts that are broken and stuff like that. And that'll go to the owners so they can work on whatever they wish to in the way of condition, but we'll do a little bit of the timber work where it's really blatantly rotted. Some of them, I just found another one up here at the front. It's going to be a major job to get to it. We could get a router in and just route a big square out of the wood and jigsaw a piece back in, but I don't like that idea. You want to replace the whole piece, or especially on these side straight pieces, I can get to them, I think. I've also sort of got the nod to paint the wheels too. I can't understand why, but someone has had those wheels apart. They're all numbered. All the spokes are numbered. All of them have been apart at some stage, but they haven't repainted it since then. And the numbers are still visible because you always put the spokes and the fallies back in the same place. That's understandable, except I can't see where the tyre's been put back on. Normally, you heat a tyre up to put on the wheel, it burns the woodwork, and particularly paintwork, as you're putting it back on. There's no evidence that the tyre's gone back on, but the spokes are stripped of paint. Yeah, I don't know what's happened there. Someone's done some maintenance on it. But anyway, I've had the nod to repaint the wheels, so I probably will. And it's been a good experience, for us too. Just fishing around for that history and the connections. It's tied a lot of things together, particularly with the Bolton collection in my head.
It is good if you could go for a ride on a coach, or at least get up close and feel this and touch it. We would bend the rules too, and people who were sight impaired, we'd let them, feel the coach and the vehicles and things. Yeah. And that's why I say sometimes with reproductions, if you want to have a coach on the road, you're not going to have something that's over 100 years old and, should have been retired after 10 years. I think it's great that people can go for a ride on a coach, but it's going to be a reproduction coach, and a good reproduction coach is a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah, I can open the doors up and show them how it works. I can climb up on it. I can give it a shake to show them the leather suspension, for instance, and I can't touch our old vehicles like that.
But here's the question. At the moment, sitting in the museum's workshop is a coach that looks a lot like an original Cobb Co coach, and yet the only authentic parts of it are the two axles. And while it's not so much of an issue with this example, one of the big questions that museum curators around the world have to ask themselves every day is how many original components of a historic piece can have been replaced or upgraded due to wear and tear before you can no longer call it an original.
I think everyone will be different and will have a different opinion on that. So even in our coach gallery, when you visit Cobb Co, you'll walk into the gallery and you'll see 3 Cobb Co coaches, and each of them have a varying degree of restoration that's been done to them. So there's the coach 112, which was one of the last Cobb Co coaches, which is virtually pristine. That is a Cobb Co coach that was taken off the road and put into a museum and has been only conserved to keep it in good condition, but not restored in any way to change anything about it fundamentally. We have a coach that was a frame that was found, and it was built and restored in the 1950s from the frame up. And then we have a coach that was converted into a drover's wagon and used for many, many years across the Northern Territory, Queensland and Northern New South Wales as a droving wagon. And that was restored from about halfway up because the roof had virtually just been taken off. Right. So that was restored and added back and restored to full condition. So each of them have a varying degree of restoration that's happened, but I feel like most people feel that they're all Cobb Co coaches. They do have that foundation that was a Cobb Co coach, and other people may disagree with that. They may feel like the one that was just the frame, doesn't fit into that category as much, but they all have a Cobb Co story. Three of them were probably all built in Charleville, so they have that connection to that being built here as well. So I think everyone will have an opinion on that, but I think a lot of it is about how people feel about them as well, which is interesting because people do get very strong emotional attachments to these objects as well.
A classic example is up at Townsville at Museum of Tropical Queensland, our affiliate up there, our network. They've got a replica of the boat that went down, the Pandora, which was associated with the Bounty. And it's a scale model I think it's 2 metres long. It's a scale model of a sailing ship, and it is magnificent detail. You look at that and you start to understand the tensions needed to hold a mast in place. How the capstans brought the anchors back up and down, and it's that detailed that you know how a ship works just by looking at the model.
So in some cases, do museums have to make it clear to the public when they've done a lot of restoration to a particular exhibit?
In some cases you do.
Right.
So it just sort of depends on what the object is. So if you had a wagon, for example, that was a bit damaged and you were wanting to display it and it had panels of wood missing or something like that, you may put a newer piece of wood in, but you make it very clear that it's actually new, and you might have a date on it that says 2024, so that so a visitor can say, oh, okay, that part they've added in, and the rest is authentically the original wagon or whatever vehicle it may be. So there is a place for doing that type of work if it's structural, or if it's not going to be able to support itself. You can do some restoration work just to keep it stable, but you try to make it quite clear that this is something we've added to stabilize it. We're not trying to age it to make it look like it's original. You try to make it a bit more clear. And even with the coaches that we have on display, we'll talk about the fact that they were restored at Ferguson's Coachworks in Toowoomba. So you include that because it's a part of the story. And the story of them being used in the 1950s and 60s is great as well. And it's a really amazing part of that Cobb Co collection of the Boltons that adds to the story of it, doesn't take anything away. Because I think in a lot of circumstances, replicas are the only way you sometimes have an equivalent that people can actually see and get an idea of the scope or size or scale of an object that may no longer exist. We're lucky that we do have Cobb Co coaches, but having replicas that you can drive on the road and that you can actually take people for rides in potentially, there are a lot of people who have replicas around that will use them and operate them and let people experience the swaying and the motion of these coaches, and that experience of history is something that's really, I think, quite useful and unique. And the fact that you can touch them as well is amazing.
It's a very good example, replica example of a Cobb Co coach. Unfortunately, it's probably not in good enough condition to horse, but where it will shine is people will be able to sit and take pictures where they can't with these, they don't want these vehicles touched for good reason. So yes, it has a good role to play for those celebrations.
I think for sure, given the connection with those sort of trade people, like old Cole Ferguson, the end of the era. He died in 1970 or 71 or something like that. An old man who'd seen the end of the horse-drawn era. But he'd passed his knowledge on to Jeff. and then Jeff was working, and they produced things that sort of carry on that legacy. So it's definitely a continued story, and it'll go back to the collection, and now I believe it's going to St George, and hopefully it'll fill out a larger story again with all that paraphernalia that I mentioned. It's a bigger Australian story, and it becomes one little keystone in there.